One of the most remarkable things about Laugh-In is the way it handled censorship. The show did not keep that fight hidden behind the scenes. It turned the battle itself into comedy. It mocked the system trying to control it, right in front of the audience that system claimed it was protecting, while using airtime paid for by the network itself. The best-known example is the phrase, "beautiful downtown Burbank." The show repeated it so often that it became part of its identity. NBC's production facilities were in Burbank, a suburb of Los Angeles that nobody would seriously describe as glamorous. That was the joke. Hosts, cast members, and celebrity guests kept saying, "beautiful downtown Burbank," with a kind of exaggerated respect. It sounded like praise, but the audience understood what was really happening. Every time the phrase came up, the show was quietly pointing at the corporate machine just off camera and reminding viewers that it knew exactly where it was. Then there was, "look that up in your Funk and Wagnalls." Funk and Wagnalls was a real encyclopedia and dictionary set. At the same time, the name had a sound that suggested something a censor might not like, which was exactly why Schlatter used it. It let the show signal that a fight was happening upstairs over language and limits, while still slipping past the people reading the script. The audience got the joke. The censors could examine the transcript and find nothing they could cleanly object to, because the whole point lived in the sound. The show even created a segment called Salute to Censorship. It aired on NBC. It ran as an open segment on the very show NBC's censors were assigned to watch. That alone says a lot about how bold the production had become. Then there was the set called the CFG Automat. For cast members, it was an inside joke. They used the initials to refer to George Schlatter as Crazy Fucking George. The letters were sitting there in plain sight as part of the set dressing. As far as anyone can tell, nobody at Standards and Practices ever asked what they meant. That was the real cleverness of Laugh-In. It made censorship visible to everyone, except the censors. The audience could feel the pressure around the show, and that tension gave the jokes extra energy. Every line felt like it had slipped through a gap in the wall. 3 seconds that might have changed a presidential election. In September 1968, Laugh-In did something that had never been done before on American television. It invited a presidential candidate to step into its comic world and deliver the show's most famous catchphrase. That candidate said yes. Richard Nixon arrived at NBC's Burbank studios on September 12, 1968. The invitation had come from writer Paul Keyes, who was a personal friend of Nixon. The idea was simple and sharp. Nixon would say, "Sock it to me?" That phrase was already deeply tied to the show, and especially to Judy Carn, who was regularly drenched, surprised, and made the center of physical comedy. The joke rested in the contrast. Nixon was known as stiff, guarded, and deeply unfunny. Seeing him ask to be socked created the whole effect in an instant. It took 6 takes to get it right. According to Schlatter, Nixon was willing to say the line, but his instinct was wrong for the joke. He wanted to deliver it with force, almost like a challenge. The producers needed something lighter. They wanted the line to sound puzzled, slightly amused, and just uncertain enough to make the moment work. So they kept going. On the 6th take, they got what they needed. Schlatter grabbed the tape, rushed it back to NBC, and dropped it into the next episode. The clip lasts only 3 seconds. That is what makes it so fascinating. It was only 3 seconds on a show watched by nearly a third of American households. Hubert Humphrey also received an invitation. He turned it down. Later, he told Schlatter that saying no had cost him votes. Nixon won the 1968 election by a very narrow margin. No one can prove that 3 seconds on a comedy show changed the result. That part will always remain unknowable. It even exists tells you how important the appearance became. Years later, Schlatter reflected on it with a mix of humor and regret. He said that people sometimes told him he helped get Nixon elected, and that he had to live with that. He also made a larger point that has turned out to matter even more. After that moment, political candidates could no longer ignore entertainment television. They had to appear. They had to seem human, play along. That now familiar ritual begins here, in a 3-second clip, on this show, filmed in beautiful downtown Burbank. What happens when the same formula goes 1 inch too far. To understand why Turn On collapsed so quickly, you first have to understand what Laugh-In got right. The answer is restraint, not moral restraint. The show knew how far to go before moving on. Laugh-In touched almost everything. Vietnam, race, sex, politics, drugs, authority, religion. It would hit a subject, land a joke, and then race to the next thing before the audience had time to settle into outrage. It gave the show a playful surface. It felt colorful, loose, and mischievous. Beneath that surface, the material could be sharp. The delivery softened the blow. It let the show say more than it should have been able to say. At the same time, the Smothers Brothers Comedy Hour was doing something else. That show wore its politics more openly, stayed in the argument longer. CBS eventually canceled it outright on April 4, 1969, just 3 months after Turn On had already fallen apart. Turn On learned the wrong lesson from Laugh-In's success, qualities that had made that shock manageable for a wide audience. It moved faster. It became more abstract. It pushed further into experiment. At the same time, it removed the features that had helped Laugh-In feel friendly enough to survive. There were no permanent sets. There was no laugh track. The whole premise centered on a computer generating comedy inside a blank white void. The jokes focused heavily on sex, and this was not the quick-coded innuendo that Laugh-In could flash and leave behind. Viewers described the word sex appearing in huge letters and pounding across the screen with a throbbing force. One female viewer later said she could barely remember anything else from the episode. Then came one of the most unforgettable responses in television history. The Wee Boy Wes general manager in Cleveland sent ABC's president a telegram that captured the mood perfectly. He wrote that if Schlatters' naughty little boys needed to write dirty words on walls, they shouldn't use our walls in Cleveland. He had made up his mind. Then he picked up the phone and started calling other affiliates. ABC was shaken by the fallout and quickly pulled back. In the wake of Turn On, the network became even more cautious. Not long after, they rejected a pilot from Norman Lear, a writer whose work they judged too foul-mouthed and too racially provocative. The project was turned down after 2 pilots. ABC's chairman later explained the decision in plain terms. He said they believed the public would not accept it. CBS saw the same material differently. A new executive wanted programming that would stir conversation, so CBS picked it up. The show was All in the Family. It debuted on January 12, 1971, and went on to become one of the most important sitcoms in American television history. That is the final twist in this part of the story. Turn On failed so badly that it frightened one network away from the future. Another network stepped forward and took that future for itself.